The title sounds like advice. It isn't. It's a confrontation. Stop trying so hard. That sentence hits the ego first. Because everything inside you has been trained to believe the opposite. That more effort equals more progress. That struggle is proof you're moving forward. That if you're tired, you must be doing something right. But what if that belief is the exact thing keeping you stuck? That's the real tension here. This isn't about laziness. It's about misdirected intensity. Daniel was 34, a senior product designer in a fast-growing tech company. From the outside, he looked sharp, disciplined, driven, the kind of person people assume will make it. But internally, something wasn't right. Every day felt like a sprint that led nowhere. He woke up early, checked messages before his eyes fully adjusted to light, and immediately stepped into urgency. Meetings, deadlines, revisions, feedback loops. Everything demanded attention, everything felt important, and Daniel responded the only way he knew how. He pushed harder. He optimized his mornings, cut distractions, bought tools, watched strategy videos, read productivity books, built systems on top of systems. He didn't lack knowledge. He lacked results. And that contradiction started to eat at him. Because when you're doing everything right and still not moving forward, the mind doesn't question the system. It questions you. Maybe you're not disciplined enough. Maybe you're not smart enough. Maybe you're just not built for this. So he compensated the only way his identity allowed. More effort, longer hours, less rest, more pressure. He became sharper, faster, more intense, and strangely, less effective. His ideas became safe, predictable, overworked. He spent hours refining things that didn't need refinement. He overthought simple decisions. He started second-guessing instincts that used to feel natural. And worst of all, he couldn't stop. Because stopping felt like losing. That's the trap no one explains. When effort becomes your identity, slowing down feels like betrayal. Not of your goals, of yourself. One evening, after a 12-hour workday, Daniel sat in his car outside his apartment, engine off, lights out. Just sitting there, not scrolling, not thinking about work, just sitting. And for the first time in a long time, there was no urgency. No pressure, no voice telling him to do more. Just quiet. It felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. But then something unexpected happened. A thought surfaced. Not loud, not aggressive, clear. If working harder was the answer, wouldn't it have worked by now? He didn't react immediately. Because that question wasn't simple. It was dangerous. It challenged everything he believed about success. Because if effort wasn't the solution, then what was all this for? That night, he didn't open his laptop, didn't catch up, didn't plan tomorrow. He went inside, sat on the floor, and let the silence stay. And in that silence, patterns started revealing themselves. Not through analysis, through contrast. He noticed something he had ignored for years. His best work never came from pressure, it came from clarity. Moments when his mind was relaxed, unforced, when ideas felt obvious, not constructed. But those moments had become rare, because his life had no space for them anymore. He had filled every gap with effort, every pause with action, every uncertainty with force. And in doing that, he had eliminated the very condition his mind needed to perform at its best. That realization didn't feel exciting. It felt heavy, because it meant something uncomfortable. The problem wasn't his capability, it was his approach. And changing approach is harder than increasing effort, because effort feels like control. Approach requires letting go. Letting go of habits that feel productive. Letting go of systems that look efficient. Letting go of the identity that says, I am someone who outworks everyone. That identity had protected him, given him confidence, given him direction. But now, it was suffocating him. Daniel leaned back against the wall and stared at nothing. And for the first time, he didn't try to solve anything. He just observed. And what he saw was simple. Every time he forced progress, he created resistance. Mental resistance. Emotional resistance. Creative resistance. It showed up as overthinking, fatigue, frustration. The subtle signals he had been ignoring because they didn't match his belief system. Because in his world, if it's hard, it must be working. But what if hardness is a signal, not of progress, but of misalignment? That thought stayed. It didn't disappear like most ideas do. It lingered, followed him into the next morning, sat quietly in the background while he opened his laptop again. And for a moment, everything felt the same. Same screen, same tasks, same expectations. But something inside him was different. He didn't rush, didn't immediately react. He paused. And in that pause, he noticed the urge. The familiar pull to start doing everything at once, to prove productivity, to build momentum through force. But instead of acting on it, he watched it, detached, curious. And for the first time, he asked a different question. Not what should I do next, But why do I feel the need to rush at all? That question shifted everything. Because urgency, he realized, wasn't coming from reality. It was coming from fear. Fear of falling behind. Fear of not being enough. Fear of losing control. And effort had been his way of silencing that fear. But it never actually removed it. It just buried it under action. And buried things don't disappear. They build pressure. Until one day, they start controlling you. Daniel sat there, hands still, screen glowing, and felt something unfamiliar. Not motivation, not pressure. Space. And in that space, a new possibility emerged. What if progress isn't about doing more, but about needing less? What if clarity isn't found through effort, but through subtraction? That idea didn't feel natural. It felt wrong, because it went against everything he had practiced for years. But it also felt true. And sometimes truth doesn't feel comfortable. It feels disruptive, because it forces you to see what you've been avoiding. Daniel closed his laptop, not dramatically, calmly, because for the first time, he wasn't trying to win the day. He was trying to understand it. And that shift was the beginning of everything changing. The next day didn't start with clarity. It started with resistance. Daniel woke up at the same time, same alarm, same room. But something inside him didn't want to move the way it used to. Not physically, mentally. There was hesitation, not laziness, awareness. Because now he could see the pattern before stepping into it. And that made it harder to blindly repeat. He sat at the edge of his bed, phone in his hand, thumb hovering over notifications. The old version of him would have already opened everything. Emails, messages, metrics, immediate immersion into urgency. But now he paused, because he understood something new. Every input creates direction, and most of his inputs were hijacking his direction before he even chose it. So he did something small. He put the phone down. That was it. No big speech, no dramatic shift, just a decision to not react instantly. And in that tiny moment, something subtle happened. He felt in control, not of everything, just of the next move. That's where the reverse effort strategy actually begins. Not with action, with restraint. Because if you can't control what you respond to, you can't control where you go. Daniel walked to his desk slower than usual. No rush, no urgency performance. He opened his laptop, and instead of diving in, he stared at the blank space in front of him. Not the screen, the space. Because now he knew something he didn't before. Clarity needs room. So instead of asking what to do, he asked something sharper. What actually deserves my effort today? Not what demands it, not what's loud, what deserves it. There's a difference. Demand is external, deserve is internal. And most people never learn to separate the two. That's why they stay busy and stuck. Daniel grabbed a notebook. Not his task manager, not his apps, a physical notebook. Because he wanted friction. Digital makes everything easy, too easy. Easy to add, easy to overwhelm. He wrote down everything pulling at his attention. Deadlines, messages, projects, random thoughts, half-finished ideas. It filled the page quickly. And as he looked at it, he felt that familiar pressure rising again. The urge to attack it, to prove control through action. But this time, he didn't follow it. He questioned it. Which of these actually matters? Not later. Now. Silence. Because most of it didn't. That's the uncomfortable truth. Most of what fills your day is noise, wearing the mask of importance. And your brain can't tell the difference when you're moving too fast. So he slowed down, and he started cutting, not organizing, not prioritizing, eliminating. Entire lines disappeared. Things he thought were essential suddenly looked optional. Things that felt urgent revealed themselves as irrelevant. It wasn't easy, because every task he crossed out felt like risk. What if this matters later? What if I regret this? What if I fall behind? That's the voice of accumulation, the belief that more equals safety, but safety in excess is what creates stagnation. After 10 minutes, the page looked different. Not full, focused. 3 things remained, just 3. And that simplicity felt uncomfortable, because now there was nowhere to hide. No buffer tasks, no busy work, just real movement. That's when the second part of the strategy activated. Reduction creates responsibility. If you only have a few things to do, you actually have to do them well. Daniel stared at the first task. Normally this is where he would push, force focus, eliminate distractions aggressively. But he stopped himself, because he remembered something critical. Force creates resistance. So instead of attacking the task, he approached it differently. What's the smallest move that creates progress? Not the finish line, the entry point. Because starting with intensity is what burns you out. Starting with precision is what pulls you in. He opened the file, made one small adjustment, then another. No rush, no pressure. And within minutes, he was in it. Not forcing focus, experiencing it. That's the difference most people never feel. Because they try to jump straight into intensity. But focus isn't something you force. It's something you enter. Gradually. Like water. The more you fight it, the harder it becomes. The more you ease into it, the more natural it feels. An hour passed, and for the first time in months, he didn't feel drained. He felt clear. That's when it clicked deeper. Effort isn't the problem. Misplaced effort is. Most people don't need more discipline. They need better direction. Because when direction is clear, effort feels lighter, cleaner, more effective. But the system wasn't stable yet. Around midday, the old pattern returned. Stronger this time, because now it felt threatened. You're doing too little. This isn't enough. You're losing momentum. The voice came back louder, more convincing, because it had years of reinforcement behind it. And for a moment, Daniel believed it. He opened new tabs, checked things that didn't matter, added tasks back into his day, trying to balance his new approach with his old identity. And within 30 minutes, everything changed again. The clarity faded, the tension returned, his mind scattered, exactly like before. That contrast hit hard, because now he couldn't pretend he didn't know. He had experienced both sides, forced effort and aligned action. And the difference wasn't subtle anymore. It was obvious. That's when the final layer of the system started forming. Protection. Because clarity isn't permanent, it's fragile. It needs to be defended. Not once. Continuously. From distractions. From unnecessary inputs. From your own habits. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Not frustrated, not overwhelmed, aware. Because now he understood something most people never realize. The real work isn't doing more. It's preventing yourself from doing what doesn't matter. And that requires something harder than effort. Restraint. The next shift didn't come from motivation. It came from discipline. Not the kind he used before. Not grinding. Not pushing. Not exhausting himself to prove something. A different kind. The discipline to stop. The discipline to not react. The discipline to leave things undone on purpose. That's where most people break. Because unfinished work feels like failure. It sits in your mind, pulling at your attention, whispering that you're falling behind. And the old version of Daniel would have listened. He would have filled every gap just to silence that discomfort. But now, he let it stay. That was the hardest part. Not doing more, doing less, and trusting it. Days passed, not dramatically different on the surface. Same job, same environment, same expectations. But internally, everything was changing. He started noticing patterns he couldn't unsee anymore. The meetings that created no movement. The tasks that existed only to maintain appearances. The conversations that felt productive but led nowhere. Before he would have engaged with all of it, fully, intensely. Because effort was his language. Now he started stepping back. Not aggressively, quietly. He spoke less, listened more, chose his inputs carefully, and something unexpected happened. People didn't see him as less committed. They saw him as sharper, more precise, more intentional. Because when you remove noise, your signal becomes stronger. And signal is what actually moves things. One afternoon, his manager asked him a simple question. How are you handling so much without burning out? Daniel almost smiled. Because the truth was, he wasn't handling more. He was handling less, but better. He didn't explain everything. He just said, I stopped trying to do everything. It sounded simple, but it carried weight. Because most people can't do that. They're addicted to effort. Addicted to feeling busy. Addicted to the identity of someone who's always pushing. But that identity comes at a cost. It blinds you, makes you equate motion with progress, noise with productivity, struggle with growth. Daniel had lived inside that illusion for years. And breaking out of it didn't feel like winning. It felt like losing something. Losing urgency. Losing that constant drive. Losing the chaos that made him feel important. But what replaced it was something stronger. Clarity. And clarity doesn't scream. It doesn't rush. It doesn't try to prove anything. It just moves directly. A week later, the real test came. A high-stakes project. Tight deadline. Multiple people involved. The kind of situation where his old self would have exploded into overdrive. Long hours, high pressure, maximum effort. Everything in him felt that pull again. The urge to go back, to prove he could handle it, to show intensity. But this time, he paused. Not for long, just enough. And he asked the only question that mattered now. What actually moves this forward? Not everything. Not what looks good. What actually matters? He broke the project down, not into tasks, into impact. Which parts created real progress? Which parts were just noise? And once again, he cut. Ignored non-essential discussions. Reduced unnecessary collaboration. Focused only on the core pieces that changed outcomes. And then he executed. Calmly, directly. No rush, no panic, just clear movement. And something strange happened. He finished earlier than expected, with better results. Less stress, more clarity. That's when it fully locked in. The reverse effort strategy wasn't about doing less for comfort, it was about doing less for precision. Because when you remove everything that doesn't matter, what's left becomes powerful. Most people try to increase their output, but the real shift happens when you increase your signal. And signal doesn't come from effort, it comes from elimination, from restraint, from choosing not to engage with things that dilute your focus. Daniel looked back at who he used to be. The constant grinder, the one who believed exhaustion was proof, the one who filled every second to avoid facing stillness. And he realized something uncomfortable. He wasn't working hard because it was effective. He was working hard because it was familiar, because it protected him from doubt, because it gave him a sense of control. But it never gave him real progress. That came later. When he stopped, when he questioned, when he removed, and most importantly, when he let go of the need to prove himself through effort. Because that's the real shift. This isn't a productivity trick, it's an identity change. You stop being the person who tries hard and become the person who moves correctly. You stop chasing volume and start protecting direction. You stop reacting to everything and start choosing deliberately. That's where power is. Not in how much you can do, but in how much you can ignore. So if you feel stuck, if you're working harder than ever, but nothing is changing, it's not because you're not doing enough. It's because you're doing too much of what doesn't matter. And deep down, you already know it. You feel it in the friction, in the fatigue, in the quiet moments where things don't make sense. That's not weakness, that's awareness trying to break through. Listen to it, because the moment you stop trying so hard is the moment things finally start moving. Not because you became better, but because you stopped getting in your own way. And from that point forward, you don't chase progress anymore. You create it.